The Mafia boss's lawyer vanished before the trial, and a 27-year-old junior associate drowning in debt had to take over the $800 million case. The defense chair was empty, and $800 million were about to slip through the cracks like blood down a drain. The Federal Court of New York had never seen this many people crammed into a single courtroom, not even during the infamous mob trials of the 80s. Reporters shoved each other in the galleries. Cameras pointed at every corner like hungry wolves waiting for the kill. And the air conditioning seemed to have surrendered entirely, perhaps out of shame for having to witness the downfall of Lucian Moretti, the man they called the Devil of the East Coast. Lucian sat alone at the defense table, his gray eyes scanning the room with the cold precision of a predator who had just realized he was the prey. 36 years old, owner of an empire that stretched from luxury hotels to underground casinos, the kind of man who made senators nervous and competitors disappear. But at that moment, even the devil himself could not find his lawyer. Thomas Reed, the man who had protected the Moretti family for 30 years, who charged $5,000 an hour and had never lost a case, had simply vanished into thin air. And what happened next would change everything. If this story hooks you, hit like and share it with someone who loves a good thriller. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. Now let us see who dared to walk into the devil's courtroom. Judge Patricia Hayes glanced at the wall clock for the 4th time in the span of 2 minutes. She was the kind of judge who made even the most battle-hardened attorneys quietly reconsider their career choices. Her silver hair was swept into a flawless bun without a single strand out of place. Her gold-rimmed glasses seemed custom-made to make people feel guilty, and her patience had clearly run out sometime in the previous decade. She struck the gavel once, the dry crack echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "Mr. Moretti," she said, each word sharp enough to slice through the air, "this court doesn't have time for theatrics. You have exactly 5 minutes to secure legal representation, or I will dismiss this case due to the defendant's absence." Lucian rose to his feet, fastening the button of his suit jacket with unhurried precision, as if he were standing in his own boardroom rather than facing the possible loss of $800 million. "Your Honor," he said, his voice so low and steady it was almost irritating, "my attorney appears to have encountered an unexpected complication." Across the courtroom, Prosecutor Richard Blake didn't bother to hide the triumphant smile on his polished face. Blake shaved his head every day because he believed it made him look more intimidating, but in truth it only made him resemble a billiard ball fueled by political ambition and an ego the size of the entire state of Texas. "Your Honor." Blake stood, his tone dripping with pleasure. Perhaps Mr. Moretti's lawyer has finally realized that defending a criminal is a futile endeavor. Or perhaps, he paused to savor the moment, even the most expensive attorneys have limits to what their conscience can endure. A ripple of snickering laughter spread through the gallery. Reporters hammered at their keyboards with manic energy, and Lucian could almost see the headlines forming in real time. The East Coast Devil abandoned, the Moretti empire collapsing, Mafia boss facing humiliating defeat. Lucian didn't let his expression shift by even a fraction. He had faced enemies who wanted him dead, rivals who wanted to steal his empire, and once he had even survived a car bombing when he was only 23 years old. An empty chair wasn't going to break him. Yet inside his mind, a single question kept circling without rest. Where was Thomas Reed, the man who had protected the Moretti family for 30 years, who had never been late to an appointment, never missed a hearing, never broken a promise? The phone in Lucian's jacket pocket vibrated. He meant to ignore it, but the instincts of a man who had survived 20 years in the underworld made him glance down at the screen. A message from a hidden number. Lucian opened it and felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. The image struck him like a fist to the chest. Thomas Reed sat on a wooden chair in a pitch-dark room, his hands bound behind his back, his mouth sealed with black tape. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead down his cheek, staining the once immaculate collar of his white shirt. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with intent, as if he were trying to say something through the lens of the camera. Beneath the photo was a line of text, brief and brutally clear. 800 million, or he dies. Don't contact the police. We're watching. Lucian slipped the phone back into his pocket, his face as still as a frozen lake, but inside him, rage was erupting like molten lava. Someone had dared to touch one of his people. Someone had dared to challenge the East Coast Devil, and that person would pay. Judge Hayes struck the gavel again. "Mr. Moretti," she said. 4 minutes. Lucian lifted his gaze, his gray eyes cold as ice, now colder still. He needed time to think, to plan, to identify the hand behind it all. But time was a luxury he didn't have. And then, as if the universe had decided to throw another card onto this already chaotic table, the courtroom doors burst open with a thunderous crash. A human-shaped whirlwind tore through the doorway, as if she had just been fired from a cannon. She was a young woman, perhaps around 27 years old, with brown hair in wild disarray, as though she had recently fought a storm and lost. Her gray blazer had clearly seen better days, possibly back when Clinton was still president, with frayed elbows and a suspicious coffee stain clinging to the lapel. But what held every gaze in the courtroom wasn't the disastrous outfit or the bird nest hair. It was the fact that the heel of her right shoe had snapped clean off, forcing her to run with the unsteady tilt of a boat caught in heavy seas. And then, as if the universe decided her entrance wasn't dramatic enough, that broken heel chose the worst possible moment to betray her completely. She stumbled, not the light, graceful stumble one could pretend was intentional. This was the full-body kind, the kind where the world slows down as the victim realizes she's about to meet the floor face first. Her battered leather briefcase flew from her hand like a drunken bird, spinning through the air before landing with a heavy thud. The latch burst open, and papers poured out like a waterfall, scattering across the central aisle of the most prestigious federal courtroom in New York. She went down on her knees, her glasses knocked crooked across her face, and began desperately gathering documents while whispering a symphony of panic. No, no, no. Please no. Oh God, no. The entire courtroom froze. Judge Hayes stopped mid-gavel. Reporters stopped typing. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath, although it had surrendered long ago. Lucian Moretti, the man the underworld called the devil, the man who had just received a photo of his lawyer bound and bleeding, the man facing the loss of $800 million, found himself unable to look away from the chaos unfolding before him. One sheet of paper drifted gently through the air, floating like an autumn leaf, before landing perfectly on the polished Italian leather shoes of prosecutor Richard Blake. Blake looked down with an expression mixing disgust and cruel delight, as if someone had just placed a cockroach on his dinner table. He picked up the paper with 2 fingers, holding it away from himself as though it were toxic waste. "This," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "is an electricity bill." He paused, reading more closely, and the smile on his face stretched even wider. An electricity bill, 3 months overdue. Laughter erupted through the gallery like fireworks. Reporters doubled over. Some even pointed. This was no longer the trial of the century. It was a late-night comedy show. The young woman snatched the paper from Blake's hand with the dignity of a cat that had just fallen off a table and was pretending it had all been part of the plan. "That's supporting documentation," she said, her voice trembling but her chin held high. No one in the room believed her. The laughter only grew louder. Lucian watched as she struggled to stand, gathering the remaining papers, pushing her glasses back onto the bridge of her nose, tugging her wrinkled blazer straight. She was a walking disaster, an accident waiting to happen, a joke the entire courtroom was laughing at. But Lucian didn't laugh, because he saw something no one else in that room bothered to notice. Her eyes. Amid the chaos, the humiliation, the echoing mockery filling the room, her hazel eyes didn't waver. There were no tears, no collapse, only a quiet, smoldering fire. A light Lucian recognized instantly, because he'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 20 years. It was the look of someone with no way back. Judge Hayes removed her glasses, wiped the lenses with a slow, ominous calm that promised serious consequences, then put them back on. "And who are you?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. The young woman finally managed to stand upright, though the broken heel forced her to lean slightly to one side like a human version of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. She drew in a deep breath, nudged her glasses up the bridge of her nose with a trembling finger, and faced Judge Hayes. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice only shook a little, "my name is Ava Collins, a junior associate at Harrison & Associates, legal counsel for Moretti Holdings." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before Richard Blake burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle that could be ignored, but a deep belly laugh, the kind that turned his face red and sent tears to the corners of his eyes. He even had to brace himself on the table to stay upright. "Your Honor," Blake said once he caught his breath, his voice still quivering as he fought back laughter. "Is this a federal trial or some kind of hidden camera prank show? The intern wants to take over an $800 million case." "I am not an intern," Ava corrected him, her voice firming just a notch. "I am a junior associate. There is a difference." "Oh, my apologies." Blake raised both hands as if surrendering, his face twisting with sarcasm. "A junior associate who tripped over her own shoes wants to go head-to-head with one of the largest corporate cases of the decade. That changes everything." Laughter rolled through the gallery again. One reporter even whistled. Ava stood there in the middle of the storm of mockery, her battered leather briefcase clutched in her hand, papers still scattered across the floor, and Lucian could see the way she swallowed, the movement of her throat as she fought to stay composed. She was afraid. It was obvious in plain daylight. But she didn't run. Judge Hayes struck the gavel once to silence the laughter, then fixed Ava with a look that Lucian was certain had made many seasoned attorneys break out in a cold sweat. "Ms. Collins," she said slowly, each word heavy as stone, "do you understand that if I allow this and you fail, the consequences for your client will be catastrophic? $800 million, a ruined reputation, possibly prison time. Are you prepared to bear that responsibility?" The entire courtroom held its breath. Lucian looked at her, the young woman in the worn blazer and the overdue electricity bill, standing in an arena of wolves. He expected her to collapse, expected her to apologize and flee the room like any sane person would. But Ava Collins didn't run. Instead, she did something that made Lucian tilt his head with genuine curiosity. She stepped forward, not the hesitant step of someone about to quit, but the step of someone who had made a decision, no matter how insane that decision might be. Her back straightened, her shoulders no longer curled inward, and when she spoke again, her voice no longer trembled. "Your Honor," Ava said, "I understand that my appearance here is unconventional. I understand that the prosecution finds this amusing." She glanced toward Blake with a polite smile that Lucian could see had sharp edges hidden beneath it. "But while the prosecutor has been busy laughing, I have reviewed every page of the case filed against my client, and I can assure the court that I am fully capable of conducting this defense." Blake stopped laughing. The smile on his face froze like butter shoved into a freezer. He stared at Ava as if she were a lamb that had suddenly grown fangs. Judge Hayes tilted her head, studying Ava as though she were trying to solve a particularly intriguing puzzle. "And you are willing to accept responsibility if you fail?" Ava didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, Your Honor." The courtroom sank into silence. No laughter, no whispers, only the tense waiting as every eye turned toward Judge Hayes. Lucian didn't look at the judge. He looked at Ava. And for the first time today, perhaps for the first time in many years, Lucian Moretti felt something other than his constant cold detachment. It was curiosity. This girl, with the broken heel and the overdue electricity bill, with trembling hands and a steady voice. Who was she? Why was she here? And why, amid all this chaos, did her eyes look exactly like his own had 20 years ago, when he stood before his father's grave and swore he would build an empire from the ashes? Judge Hayes remained silent for a long moment, long enough for Lucian to count 15 heartbeats, and then she struck the gavel. "The defense may proceed." The courtroom was still buzzing with whispers as Ava Collins made her way toward the defense table, the broken heel turning each step into a small act of endurance. Lucian watched her approach, and suddenly, like lightning splitting the night, the memory of the previous evening crashed into him. Thomas Reed had called at 11:30 that night, his voice strange, hoarse, urgent in a way Lucian had never heard in 30 years of knowing him. The call lasted less than a minute. Thomas said very little, but there was one sentence he repeated like a prayer. "No matter what happens, trust her." Lucian had asked who she was. Thomas hadn't answered. The line went dead, followed by silence. Lucian had called back dozens of times and heard nothing but the hollow beep of an unanswered phone. He had thought it was a strange call. Perhaps Thomas had had too much whiskey. Perhaps he was under pressure because of the trial the next day. He hadn't given it much thought. Until now. Lucian watched Ava pull out a chair beside him, placing her battered leather briefcase on the table with the careful precision of someone trying to preserve the last scraps of dignity. Her, Ava Collins, the girl with the overdue electricity bill and the worn blazer, the girl the entire courtroom had just laughed at. This was the person Thomas Reed, the legendary attorney with 30 years of experience, had asked him to trust. Lucian wasn't the kind of man who believed in coincidence. In his world, everything had a reason. Every piece on the board was positioned with intent. Thomas had known. He had known he wouldn't make it to court today. He had known, and he had prepared a contingency. The question was why her? Judge Hayes struck the gavel, signaling the formal start of proceedings. "The prosecution may present its charges," she said, her voice as sharp as ever. Richard Blake rose, the triumphant smile returning to his face as if Ava's clumsy entrance had been nothing more than a warm-up act before his inevitable victory. Lucian turned to Ava. She was opening her briefcase, and he could see her hands trembling. Not much, just a faint vibration at the tips of her fingers as she flipped through the pages, but enough for Lucian to know she was wrestling with her own fear. He leaned toward her, close enough for his breath to brush her ear, close enough to catch the scent of cheap coffee and jasmine perfume on her skin, a strange combination that wasn't nearly as unpleasant as he would have expected. "Do you know what you're doing?" he whispered, his voice low and dark, the voice he usually used when he wanted business rivals to break into a cold sweat. Ava didn't look at him. She kept turning pages, her eyes racing across the lines at a dizzying pace. But she answered, her voice barely loud enough for the two of them to hear. "No." Lucian blinked. That wasn't the answer he had expected. He had anticipated false confidence, empty bravado, or at least a carefully polished lie. But she said no, plain, unvarnished, as if the truth was the only thing she could afford. Then she continued, still not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the documents. "But I will figure it out." Lucian leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same scrutiny he reserved for contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This girl didn't know what she was doing. She admitted it without shame, but she wasn't backing down. She was sitting here, with a broken heel and trembling hands, ready to face one of the largest cases of the decade. Not because she was confident, but because she had no other choice. Lucian had met hundreds of lawyers in his life, those confident to the point of arrogance, those clever to the point of cunning, those talented to the point of danger, but he had never met anyone like Ava Collins, someone honest about her shortcomings and still willing to fight. Thomas had said trust her. Lucian didn't know yet if he could do that, but he decided, at least for now, he would give her a chance, because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the strongest, but the ones who have nothing left to lose. Richard Blake rose with the confidence of a man who knew victory was already his. He buttoned his suit jacket, smoothed his tie, and stepped into the center of the courtroom like an actor taking the stage on Broadway. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice ringing like a polished bell. "Today we are not judging an ordinary businessman. We are judging a man who turned luxury casinos into money laundering machines. A man who washed $800 million in illicit funds through the financial system of the United States right under our noses." Blake pivoted and pointed straight at Lucian like a prophet delivering judgment upon the guilty. Lucian Moretti, or as the criminal underworld calls him, the East Coast Devil. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Ava felt the pressure settle heavily on her chest, as if someone had just placed a stone there. She opened her notebook and began to write, her pen racing across the page at a frantic pace. Blake gestured to his assistant, and a large screen lit up in the corner of the courtroom. The first image was a complex diagram of money transfers, arrows tangled like a spider web. "Here," Blake said, his voice thick with drama, "is the flow of funds from unidentified sources, through 17 shell companies across 7 different countries, and finally into 3 casinos owned by Moretti Holdings in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and Monaco. $800 million. In less than 3 years." Ava kept writing without pause, struggling to keep up with every figure, every name, every detail. Blake poured out like a flood. She bit her lower lip without realizing it, a habit left over from her university days when she crammed information before exams. Lucian sat beside her, his expression calm as if he were listening to a weather forecast, but his gray eyes never left Ava. He watched the way she bit her lip, the slight furrow in her brow when the information grew complex, the way her fingers flipped pages with surprising precision. She was processing information at a speed Lucian rarely saw in anyone. "And now," Blake said, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor as he moved toward the witness stand, "I call the prosecution's first witness, Derek Chen, former chief accountant of Moretti Holdings." A man emerged from the side door, about 40 years old, gaunt-faced with black-framed glasses, and the look of someone who had not slept properly in a very long time. Derek Chen took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down with the stiff posture of a marionette. "Mr. Chen," Blake began, his tone sweet as honey, though Lucian could smell the poison beneath it. "How long did you work for Moretti Holdings?" 7 years, Derek Chen replied, his voice flat as if reading from a script. "From 2017 to 2024. "And during that time, did you witness any irregular financial activity?" Derek Chen cleared his throat, his eyes dropping as though he could not bring himself to face Lucian. "Yes. I witnessed multiple instances of large sums of cash being delivered from unidentified sources and entered into the casino accounting system as legitimate revenue." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters hammered at their keyboards like maniacs. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Ava continued writing, but inside her, a storm was forming. This testimony was damaging, extremely damaging. Blake guided Derek Chen through a series of questions, each answer driving another nail into Lucian Moretti's coffin. Chen described secret meetings, destroyed documents, direct instructions from superiors to conceal the origins of the money. He delivered it all with the pained expression of a man forced to betray, but Lucian recognized the shifty eyes of someone who was lying. The problem was proving it. Ava turned to a fresh page, her notebook already packed with notes, question marks, arrows connecting details together. She stopped at one point, her pen hovering in midair, her lips pressing together more tightly. Lucian tilted his head, watching her. She had seen something. He did not know what it was, but the brief flash of light in her eyes before she masked her reaction told him something important. The girl with the broken heel and the overdue electricity bill might have found something, and for the first time since receiving the photo of Thomas bound to a chair, Lucian Moretti felt a faint spark of hope flicker in the darkness. Judge Hayes turned toward the defense table, her gaze settling on Ava like a hawk assessing its prey. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine the witness?" Ava swallowed. This was the moment of decision. She could refuse, allow Derek Chen to step down with that lethal testimony intact, and accept defeat from the very first round. Or she could stand and face a witness carefully prepared by the most aggressive prosecution team in New York. She stood. The chair creaked behind her as if protesting her choice. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, and her voice shook. Not much, but enough for Richard Blake to wear a satisfied smile at the prosecution table. Ava stepped away from the defense table, feeling the eyes of the entire courtroom burning into her back. Her footing wobbled slightly because of the broken heel, but she forced herself to keep her balance as she approached the witness stand. Lucian watched her, and for the first time that day, he felt real concern. This girl was shaking. She was afraid, and fear in a courtroom was like blood in the water for sharks. It invited a merciless attack. "Mr. Chen," Ava began, her voice trailing slightly at the end. "You testified that you worked for Moretti Holdings for 7 years. "Yes," Derek Chen replied, his confidence noticeably stronger now that he sensed her nerves. "That is correct. And during that time, you held the position of chief accountant." "Yes." Ava asked a few more basic questions, the kind any first-year law student could come up with. "What were your responsibilities? Who did you report to? What did your daily workflow look like?" Blake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, wearing the expression of someone watching a particularly dull piece of entertainment. He even yawned, without bothering to cover his mouth, loudly enough for several jurors to notice. Lucian clenched his hand beneath the table. This was a disaster. The girl truly did not know what she was doing, just as she had admitted. She was wasting time with meaningless questions while $800 million hung over the edge of a cliff. He was considering whether to request a recess to find another lawyer, when Ava suddenly shifted direction. "Mr. Chen," she said, and there was something different in her voice now. The tremor was gone, replaced by a sharpness Lucian had not expected. "In your statement, you said you directly witnessed a large cash transaction on March 15th, 2023. Do you recall that?" Derek Chen nodded, his confidence undiminished. "Yes, I remember it very clearly. It was one of the largest transactions I witnessed. More than $20 million in cash was delivered to the main office in Manhattan. And you were present at the Manhattan office on that day." "Of course. I personally supervised the entry." Ava turned back to the defense table and opened the battered leather briefcase the entire courtroom had mocked less than an hour earlier. She pulled out a folder and returned to face Derek Chen. But this time, she did not shake. "Your Honor," Ava said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent courtroom. "The defense would like to submit Exhibit 1. This is a copy of the personnel file of Mr. Derek Chen at Moretti Holdings, confirming that he requested leave from March 14th through March 18th, 2023. Blake shot to his feet. "Objection. This document was not included in the pre-submitted evidence list." Judge Hayes raised a hand. "How was this evidence obtained, Ms. Collins?" "From the official personnel records of Moretti Holdings." "Your Honor," Ava replied, "entirely lawfully and fully verifiable. This is internal company documentation, to which my client has full access." Judge Hayes paused, then nodded. "Admitted. Continue." Ava turned back to Derek Chen, and Lucian could see sweat beginning to bead on the man's forehead. "And this," Ava continued, producing 2 more pages, "is a round-trip airline ticket from New York to Miami in the name of Derek Chen, departing on March 14th and returning on March 18th, 2023, along with a hotel registration receipt from the Fontainebleau Miami Beach for the same dates." Derek Chen went pale. Literally pale. The color drained from his face so quickly that Lucian thought he might faint right there on the stand. "Mr. Chen," Ava said, her voice now dangerously sweet. "Can you explain to the court how you personally witnessed a cash transaction in Manhattan while you were sunbathing on a beach in Miami." The courtroom erupted. The murmurs exploded into uncontrollable noise. Reporters hammered at their keyboards like their lives depended on every keystroke. Jurors exchanged shocked looks. Judge Hayes struck the gavel repeatedly, struggling to restore order. Richard Blake stood frozen, his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. Derek Chen stammered, his lips moving but no sound emerging. He looked to Blake for rescue, but the bald prosecutor was busy panicking himself. Lucian leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that day, a smile touched the corner of his mouth. The girl with the broken heel had just landed the first blow, and it was a devastating one. Judge Hayes struck the gavel one final time and declared a 30-minute recess. The courtroom remained noisy with overlapping conversations as people stood, reporters pushing into the hallway to call their newsrooms. The jury escorted into a private deliberation room. Ava was gathering her papers, her hands still trembling faintly from the aftershock of adrenaline, when she felt a hand close around her elbow. The grip was strong, firm, and allowed no refusal. She looked up and met the ice-gray eyes of Lucian Moretti. "Come with me," he said, not a request but a command. Before Ava could react, he was already pulling her through a side door into a small room reserved for attorneys to confer with their clients. The room was cramped, furnished with nothing more than a wooden table and 2 chairs, light filtering through a narrow window and casting interwoven bands of shadow and brightness. Lucian closed the door, the click of the lock sounding like a declaration. He turned to face Ava, and she realized she was backing up until her spine met the cold wall. Lucian stepped closer, each movement slow and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of her, close enough for her to catch the scent of expensive cologne and something more dangerous beneath it. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and deep like distant thunder. "I already told you," Ava replied, struggling to keep her voice steady while her heart pounded as if it wanted to break free of her chest. "Ava Collins, a junior associate at Harrison and Associates." Lucian tilted his head, studying her as if she were a painting he was trying to decipher. A typical junior associate doesn't have those documents. A typical junior associate doesn't know Derek Chen was on leave in Florida. A typical junior associate doesn't appear exactly when I need someone as if the universe arranged it. So I will ask again, who are you? And why did Thomas Reed send you here? Ava drew in a deep breath. She knew this moment would come. The moment she would have to explain something she herself didn't fully understand. "Mr. Reed contacted me last night," she said, her voice quieter now but no longer shaking. "Around 10 o'clock, he called and said he needed me to prepare a contingency file for his case. He sent me all the documents through encrypted email, including personnel records and information about Derek Chen. Why you? Why not another lawyer at the firm?" "I don't know," Ava admitted. "He only said that if he couldn't make it to court, I had to take his place. I thought he was joking, or testing me." I didn't think she hesitated, her eyes dropping. I didn't think anything had really happened to him. Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then he took his phone from his jacket pocket, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward Ava. "Something happened to him," he said, his voice flat as a frozen lake. Ava looked at the screen and felt the world tilt. The image struck her like a nightmare. Thomas Reed, the distinguished man with silver hair and a gentle smile, she remembered so clearly, was sitting on a wooden chair in a dark room, his hands bound behind him, his mouth sealed with tape. Blood ran from a wound on his forehead down his cheek, staining the collar of his white shirt red. His eyes were wide, not with fear but with a message she couldn't decipher. "No," Ava whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "No, it can't be." Lucian put the phone away, his eyes never leaving her face. "How do you know him?" Ava felt tears rise to her eyes, but she forced them back. This wasn't the time to cry. This was the time to be strong. 5 years ago, she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was a first-year law student. No money, no connections, no future. My mother had cancer, my younger brother was still in high school, and I was about to drop out because I couldn't afford tuition. Then one day, Mr. Reed appeared. He said he had a scholarship fund for students with potential but no means. He paid my entire tuition, helped me get internships, helped me secure a job after graduation." She looked up at Lucian, gratitude and pain mingling in her eyes. "Mr. Reed saved my life. Without him, I'd still be washing dishes in a restaurant." Lucian studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his gray eyes. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps understanding. "Then you understand why we have to win this case," he said. "Not just because of $800 million, but because of Thomas." Ava nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "We will win," she said, her voice steadier than it had ever been. "For him." The bell signaling the resumption of court rang faintly in the distance. Lucian opened the door, and they stepped out together, two strangers now bound by a shared secret and a common purpose: to save Thomas Reed, and to destroy whoever had dared lay a hand on him. The first day of the trial ended at 6 p.m, with Judge Hayes announcing proceedings would resume at 9 the following morning. Ava packed her documents into the battered leather briefcase, her body so exhausted she felt she could fall asleep right there at the defense table. She had been awake nearly all night preparing the files Thomas had requested, then endured the most intense day of her life inside the courtroom. Now all she wanted was to return to her tiny studio apartment in the Bronx, take a hot shower, and sleep for a solid 12 hours. But when she turned around, Lucian Moretti was standing directly behind her, and the look in his eyes told her plans were not going to happen. "You are coming with me," he said, not a question. "I need to go home," Ava protested, her voice heavy with fatigue. "My brother is waiting, and I still need to prepare for tomorrow." Lucian stepped closer, his voice dropping until only the two of them could hear. "Do you really think the people who took Thomas don't know about you? You stood up in court, represented me, and humiliated their witness. If you go back to your apartment tonight, I can't guarantee you will wake up tomorrow morning." Ava felt the blood in her veins turn cold. She hadn't thought of that. She had been so focused on not embarrassing herself in court that she forgot she had stepped into a world far more dangerous than she had imagined. "What about my brother?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Noah. He's 17. He's home alone." Lucian pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "Connor," he said into the device, "send people to this address. Protect a 17-year-old boy. Don't let him see you, but don't take your eyes off him." He recited Ava's address, an address she was certain she had never given him, and the realization that Lucian Moretti knew far more about her than she had thought sent a chill through her. He put the phone away and looked at her. "Your brother will be safe. Now come." Ava had no choice. She followed Lucian out of the courthouse, past the shouting reporters, and into a black Rolls-Royce Phantom waiting at the curb. The interior was wrapped in cream-colored leather, soft as clouds, and Ava realized this was likely the most expensive car she had ever sat in. Her old Toyota Corolla, the one that stalled without warning and whose air conditioning only worked when it felt like it, suddenly seemed like a joke compared to this luxury. They drove through New York City in silence as dusk settled in. Ava stared out the window, watching skyscrapers glide past as lights flickered on in the spreading darkness. She felt as if she were inside a dream, or perhaps a nightmare she didn't know how to wake from. The car stopped in front of a towering building in Manhattan, the kind Ava had only ever seen in movies or magazines. They entered a marble-lined lobby, past security guards in black suits who nodded to Lucian with a mix of respect and fear, and stepped into a private elevator that rose directly to the penthouse. When the doors opened, Ava felt her breath catch in her throat. Lucian Moretti's penthouse was so vast her studio apartment could have fit inside the living room with space to spare. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a sweeping view of Manhattan glowing with lights like a sea of stars beneath her feet. The decor was minimalist, yet every object radiated unmistakable wealth. An abstract painting she suspected was worth millions hung on the wall. A glossy black piano rested in the corner. A charcoal leather sofa that likely cost more than her annual income dominated the room. "Your room is at the end of the hall on the right," Lucian said, removing his suit jacket and draping it over a chair. "Everything you need is there. If you require anything, dial internal line 1. Ava nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She walked down the hallway, barefoot on the soft wool carpet, until she found the room he had indicated. It was larger than her entire apartment, with a king-size bed, a marble-ensuite bathroom, and a walk-in closet. Ava closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time that day, allowed herself to break, but not with tears. She pulled out her phone and called Noah. "Sis," her brother's voice answered on the second ring. "Where are you? I saw the news. They said you were in court. They said you're defending some Mafia boss. Are you okay?" Ava swallowed, forcing her voice to sound normal. "I'm fine," she lied, each word slicing her throat. "It's just a big case. Nothing dangerous. I have to stay late for work tonight, so I won't be home. Make sure you eat, do your homework, and go to bed early. I love you." "I love you too," Noah replied, his voice still worried. "Take care of yourself." Ava ended the call and buried her face in her hands. She had lied to her brother. She had said everything was fine, while she was sitting in the penthouse of a Mafia boss, while the man who had saved her life was being held somewhere with blood on his face, and while someone out there wanted her dead. Outside the room, Lucian stood in the shadows of the hallway, his back against the wall, silently watching through the slightly open door. He saw Ava sitting on the bed, her shoulders trembling, the phone still clutched in her hand. He heard her lie to her brother that everything was fine. He saw the way she tried to be strong for others while she was falling apart inside. And for the first time in many years, Lucian Moretti felt something beyond his constant cold detachment. It was compassion. This girl, with the broken heel and the overdue electricity bill, with a sick mother and a younger brother to care for, with debt piling up and an uncertain future, was carrying a world on her shoulders that no one knew about. And now, she had taken on his war as well. Lucian turned and walked away in silence, but the image of Ava sitting alone in that unfamiliar room followed him through the night. The clock on the wall struck 2 o'clock in the morning when a knock echoed through the silent penthouse. Lucian hadn't slept. He sat in his private office, a glass of whiskey gone cold in his hand, gray eyes locked on the image of Thomas Reed bound to a chair on his phone screen. He had stared at that photo hundreds of times since morning, searching for any clue, anything that might tell him where Thomas was being held. But the room in the image was pitch black, stripped of identifying features, as if the kidnappers had deliberately erased every trace. The knock came again, and Lucian rose to open the door. Connor Walsh stood outside, the face of the 32-year-old man tighter with tension than Lucian had ever seen in 10 years of working together. Connor was Lucian's most trusted lieutenant, the man who had followed him since he was 26 and was still proving himself worthy of the Moretti name. Connor never showed fear. Until tonight. "Boss," Connor said, his voice low and urgent. "I found him, the one behind everything." Lucian stepped aside and motioned him in. They entered the office. Connor set a laptop on the desk and opened it. The screen filled with documents, images, and complex connection diagrams. "Victor Kessler," Connor said, pointing to a photograph of a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes cold as a snake, the Chicago Mafia boss. Lucian felt his jaw tighten. He knew that name. Victor Kessler was the longtime enemy of the Moretti family, the man who had fought his father for territory 2 decades ago, before being driven back to Chicago with his tail between his legs. That was 20 years ago. Lucian had thought Kessler learned his lesson. "He's back," Connor continued. "And this time he didn't use guns. He used the law. According to our investigation, Kessler bought Derek Chen 2 years ago, paid him $500,000 to spy inside Moretti Holdings, and later act as a false witness. He also fabricated transfer records, hired hackers to breach banking systems, and create transactions that never existed." "And Thomas Reed?" Lucian asked, his voice cold as ice. "Taken by Kessler the night before the trial. His goal was to leave Boss without legal representation, so the court would automatically move forward with a conviction due to the absence of the defense. Once Boss is bankrupt and in prison, Kessler absorbs the entire Moretti empire. Casinos, hotels, real estate, everything." Lucian clenched his fist, his nails biting into his palm until it nearly drew blood. "Kessler wants a war. He's going to get one." But Connor wasn't finished. His expression tightened further, as if he were about to say something he knew would change everything. "There's more, boss. I found it while digging into Kessler's past." Connor opened another file, and an old photograph appeared on the screen. It showed a young man, about 35, with brown hair and kind eyes. He was wearing a security uniform and standing in front of an office building. "Daniel Collins," Connor said. 15 years ago, he worked as a security guard for one of Kessler's buildings in Queens. One night, he accidentally witnessed Kessler ordering the murder of a business rival in the parking garage. Daniel Collins intended to go to the police. Kessler found out and ordered him silenced. 2 weeks later, Daniel Collins died in a robbery on his way home. The police ruled it a mugging gone wrong and never found the killer. Lucian stared at the image, and suddenly he understood why the name Collins had sounded so familiar. "Daniel Collins," he repeated, his voice dry and hollow. "Ava Collins's father." Connor nodded grimly. "That's right, boss. The girl sleeping at the end of the hallway is the daughter of the man Kessler killed. She doesn't know. She believes her father died in a random robbery." Lucian stood frozen, his body locked like stone. 15 years. Ava had lived 15 years believing her father died by chance. She grew up with the pain of loss, with unanswered questions, with an injustice whose source she never knew. And now, by a cruel twist of fate, she was fighting beside Lucian against the very man who murdered her father, without realizing it. "Boss," Connor asked when the silence stretched on, "are you going to tell her?" Lucian didn't answer. He looked toward the end of the hallway, where Ava slept in an unfamiliar room, unaware that her life had just changed forever. "Not yet," he finally said, his voice low and heavy. "Not yet." Morning sunlight poured through the glass wall of the penthouse as Ava stepped out of the bedroom. She had managed a few hours of sleep, restless and fractured by nightmares of Thomas Reed and blood and darkness. But at least she no longer felt like a walking corpse. She had showered under the most extravagant system she had ever used, hot water spraying from 12 different nozzles like a luxury spa experience, and put on the same clothes from the day before because she had nothing else to wear. The worn blazer looked even more pitiful in the morning light of this lavish penthouse. But Ava didn't have the energy to worry about appearances. She followed the scent of coffee and toast down the hallway and stopped when she saw Lucian seated at the dining table. He looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles beneath his gray eyes. Yet his black suit was immaculate, not a single crease out of place. In front of him were 2 full breakfast plates with eggs, bacon, toast, and fresh fruit, along with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked up as she approached, and there was something in his gaze Ava couldn't decipher. It looked like exhaustion, but there was something else beneath it, something deeper, heavier. "Sit down," he said, his voice not as cold as yesterday but not warm either. "You need to eat. Today will be long." Ava sat across from him, her hands wrapping around the hot coffee cup as if seeking warmth. She took a sip and nearly groaned because it was the best coffee she had ever tasted. Nothing like the cheap instant powder she usually drank every morning. They ate in silence for a while, the soft clink of cutlery against porcelain the only sound in the vast room. Then Lucian spoke, his tone casual, as if asking about the weather. "Tell me about you." Ava looked up, surprised. "About me. Who are you, Ava Collins?" "Beyond what I already know from your file." Ava set her fork down and stared into her coffee, as if the answer might be waiting at the bottom of the cup. She didn't know why she wanted to tell this man, the one the world called the devil, the one she had met less than a day ago. But there was something in his eyes, a genuine attention she rarely saw in anyone, that made her open up. "I grew up in Queens," she began softly. "We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. My father was a security guard, my mother a nurse. Then when I was 12, my father died." Lucian froze, his coffee cup hovering just short of his lips, his body tightening like a drawn wire. "What happened?" "The police said it was a robbery gone wrong," Ava replied, her voice steady, as if she had told this story 1,000 times and learned how to separate herself from the pain. "My father was coming home late. He was cornered in an alley, stabbed for the wallet in his pocket. They never found the killer." She paused, her gaze drifting past the glass wall to the city beyond. "But I never believed it." "Why not?" Lucian asked, his voice rougher than before. "Because my father never carried much cash. He didn't even have a credit card. Who kills someone for an empty wallet?" She shook her head slightly. "I always felt something was wrong. But I was just a 12-year-old girl." No one listened. Guilt pressed against Lucian's chest like a crushing weight. He knew the truth. He knew her father hadn't died in a random robbery. He knew who had ordered his death. And he was sitting here listening to her recount 15 years of pain, her eyes unaware that the answers she had searched for her entire life were in his hands. He should tell her. He knew that. But if he did, what would she do? Would she break? Would she walk away? Would she rush to confront Kessler and put herself in danger? He couldn't risk that. Not yet. After the trial, he promised himself, after they won and Thomas was rescued, he would tell her everything, and he would help her take revenge. "After my father died," Ava continued, unaware of the storm raging inside Lucian, "my mother worked double shifts to support me and Noah, my younger brother. She wore herself down, and 2 years ago she was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. I'm trying to pay for her chemotherapy, while still owing more than $100,000 in law school debt." She gave a small laugh, hollow and without warmth. "So when Mr. Reed called and said he'd pay me 10 times my normal salary to take this case, I couldn't say no. I needed the money. My family needed the money." Lucian looked at her, the young woman in the worn blazer with eyes carrying a lifetime of pain. She wasn't fighting for glory or reputation. She was fighting to survive. For a sick mother. For a younger brother. For the endless stack of bills that never stopped coming, and he was holding a secret that could shatter her. "We should go," he said abruptly, standing and buttoning his suit jacket. "Court starts at 9. Ava nodded and rose with him. She didn't know that the man walking beside her was carrying a burden she couldn't imagine. And she didn't know that before this day was over, her world would be turned upside down once again. The second day of the trial opened with tension far heavier than the day before. There were more reporters, more cameras, and the murmur in the gallery was louder and more restless. News of the young lawyer who had stumbled in the courtroom and then returned to dismantle the prosecution's witness had spread through New York like wildfire. Ava Collins, a name no one had known, had suddenly become the focus of the entire city. But Ava had no time to think about that. She took her seat at the defense table, opened her briefcase, and prepared for the next battle. Richard Blake rose the moment Judge Hayes struck the gavel to begin proceedings, and the smile on his face made Ava uneasy. It was not the smile of a man defeated the day before. It was the smile of someone hiding an ace up his sleeve. "Your Honor," Blake said, his voice filled with restored confidence, "the prosecution would like to present new evidence. This evidence was obtained during our investigation and has been verified by our experts." Ava glanced at Lucian, but his expression remained calm as a still autumn lake. If he was worried, he hid it well. Blake signaled to his assistant, and the large screen in the courtroom lit up. A video began to play. The image showed a dim underground parking garage, yellowish lights casting a sickly glow from the ceiling. A black car was parked in the corner, and two men stood beside it in conversation. One of them was Lucian Moretti. There was no mistaking him. The height, the posture, the signature black suit, and the face with its cold gray eyes. The other man was large and heavy-set, his face crisscrossed with scars, the kind of man anyone would recognize as criminal at a glance. In the video, Lucian handed the heavy-set man a black briefcase, and the man opened it to inspect the contents. Inside were thick stacks of cash. The courtroom erupted in noise. Jurors exchanged uneasy looks. Reporters hammered at their keyboards. Ava felt her heart sink like a stone. This was visual evidence, the most powerful kind in any trial. A video showing the defendant directly handing money to a suspicious figure in a dark garage late at night. How could she fight this? "As the court and jury can clearly see," Blake said, his voice ringing with triumph. "This is direct footage of Mr. Moretti handing cash to Antonio Russo, a notorious drug trafficker with ties to multiple criminal organizations. This video was recorded by the building's security cameras on August 12th last year." Ava looked at Lucian, and this time she saw his jaw tighten. He leaned toward her, whispering so only she could hear, "I don't know anyone named Antonio Russo, and I wasn't in any parking garage on that date." Ava gave a small nod, and a spark of hope ignited in her mind. If Lucian was telling the truth, then the video was fake, and fake videos always have weaknesses. "Your Honor," Ava stood, her voice steadier than she felt. "The defense requests time to examine this video before proceedings continue." Blake scoffed. "This is clear visual evidence in broad daylight. What is there to examine?" "Precisely because it looks so clear, we need to examine it," Ava replied, her voice not trembling. "The defense has the right to verify the authenticity of any evidence presented to the court." Judge Hayes nodded. "Granted. The defense has 30 minutes. Ava sat and went to work. She pulled out her laptop, requested access to the original video file, and began analyzing it frame by frame. She was not a technology expert, but she had learned enough digital forensics in law school to know the fundamentals. And within 15 minutes, she found it. "The shadow," Ava whispered, her heart pounding faster. "The shadow doesn't match." She studied the frame more closely. The lights in the parking garage were positioned above and to the left, which meant shadows should fall down and to the right. The car's shadow was correct. The heavy-set man's shadow was correct. But Lucian's shadow fell to the left, as if he were standing under a completely different light source. "This is composited," Ava said to Lucian, her eyes brightening. "They took footage of you from another video and inserted it into this one. That's why the shadow doesn't align with the garage lighting." She continued by checking the video's metadata and found more irregularities. The file creation date didn't match the date displayed in the footage. The file had been edited multiple times using professional video editing software. The file size was smaller than expected for a video of that resolution, indicating it had been recompressed after editing. Ava stood, and this time she did not shake. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "The defense has reason to believe this video has been altered. The defendant's shadow does not align with the light source in the parking garage, indicating compositing. The file's metadata also shows multiple anomalies. We request the court summon an independent digital forensics expert to verify the authenticity of this evidence." "Objection." Blake shot to his feet, his face flushed red. "This is nothing but a delaying tactic by the defense." Judge Hayes struck the gavel once to silence him. She studied Ava for a long moment, as if reassessing the young woman she had nearly expelled from the courtroom the day before. "Request granted," she said. "The court will summon an independent digital forensics expert for the afternoon session." Blake collapsed back into his chair, his expression twisted as if he had just swallowed a lemon. Judge Hayes announced a 1-hour recess while waiting for the digital forensics expert to arrive. The courtroom slowly emptied as people poured into the hallway. reporters jostling for the best angles, attorneys from both sides gathering their files. Ava stood, her body feeling like she had just run a marathon, yet a small, fragile spark of hope flickered inside her. She had found the weakness in the fake video. She was fighting, and she had a chance to win. Her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. Ava pulled it out, assuming it was Noah checking in as usual. But when she looked at the screen, the blood in her veins froze. A message from an unknown number. No name, no source, just a single line of text, short and sharp like a knife, driven straight into her heart. Drop the case right now, or your brother will have an accident on his way to school tomorrow morning. We know which school Noah attends. We know which bus route he takes. We are watching. Attached to the message was a photograph. Noah, her 17-year-old brother, standing in front of his school gate in his familiar uniform, backpack on his shoulders, an innocent smile on his face. The photo had been taken from a distance, likely from a parked car, the angle making it clear the photographer had been watching Noah without the boy ever realizing it. Ava felt the world tilt. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself, but her legs gave way. The files slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor, and she fled the courtroom as if something were chasing her. The hallway outside was crowded, and Ava didn't want anyone to see her like this. She turned into a shadowed corner where the corridor lights didn't reach and leaned against the cold wall. Then she cried. Not loud sobs, but the kind of silent breaking cry, shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks without a sound. She had lost her father at 12. She had carried her family on her back since she was a teenager. She had worked 3 jobs at once, buried under debt, with a gravely ill mother, and she had kept going. But this was different. This was Noah, her brother, the child she had sworn to protect at all costs after their father died. If anything happened to Noah because of her, she would never forgive herself. She had to quit. That was the only choice. She would walk back into the courtroom, tell Judge Hayes she could not continue for personal reasons, and leave. Lucian Moretti would lose. $800 million would vanish. Thomas Reed might never be rescued, but Noah would be safe, and that was all that mattered. She was about to push herself upright, about to return and surrender, when a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. Lucian Moretti stood there, gray eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. He said nothing, only walked toward her, each step echoing softly in the quiet corner. When he stopped in front of her, close enough to see the tears still clinging to her lashes, he remained silent for a moment. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and deep, but there was something different in it, a genuine concern Ava hadn't expected. Ava wanted to lie. She wanted to say it was nothing, just exhaustion, just pressure, but she was too tired to lie anymore. She handed him her phone, the screen still displaying the threat and Noah's photo. Lucian looked at the screen, and Ava saw his body tense like a wire pulled to its limit. His gray eyes darkened, his jaw tightened, and something dangerous ignited in his gaze. This wasn't ordinary anger. It was the fury of a man accustomed to destroying anyone who dared challenge him. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Connor," he said, his voice cold as ice and sharp as a blade. "Increase protection on Noah Collins to maximum level. I want at least 6 men on him 24/7. No one comes within 50 meters of the boy without being checked. If there is any sign of a threat, notify me immediately. And Connor, find out who sent this message. I want a name, an address, and a blood type before sunset." He ended the call and turned back to Ava. She stood there, eyes red from crying, staring at him in disbelief. "Why?" she asked hoarsely. "Why are you doing all this? Noah has nothing to do with you. I am just your temporary lawyer. You don't need to protect my family." Lucian looked at her, and for a brief moment the cold mask he wore cracked. Something softer, more human, flickered in his gray eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by his familiar steel. "You stepped into my world when you accepted this case," he said, his voice low and unyielding. "From that moment on, you became mine. And no one threatens what is mine, and walks away." He stepped closer, close enough for Ava to feel the warmth of his body, close enough that she had to look up at him. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, his voice gentler but no less firm. "I will protect you and your family. That is a promise. And Lucian Moretti doesn't break promises." Ava looked into those gray eyes and knew he was telling the truth. She didn't know why. She didn't understand how. But she knew the man the world called the devil had just become the shield standing between her and the darkness. She wouldn't quit. She would fight. For Thomas Reed. For Noah. And perhaps, in some quiet corner of her heart, for the man standing before her, who had sworn no one would ever harm her again. The afternoon session of the trial began with the arrival of Dr. Margaret Chen, a leading digital forensics expert from Columbia University, summoned to analyze the video submitted by the prosecution. She was a woman in her early 50s, with neatly cropped silver hair and black-framed glasses, the unmistakable presence of a serious academic with no patience for courtroom games. She took the witness stand, swore the oath, and sat down holding a thick stack of reports. Richard Blake remained at the prosecution table, his face tense but still clinging to an air of confidence. He was certain his video was flawless, certain the forgers had been meticulous, certain no one could uncover the truth. But the moment Dr. Chen began to speak, that confidence evaporated like morning mist under sunlight. "Your Honor," Dr. Chen began, her voice calm and professional. After a thorough analysis of the video presented by the prosecution, "I have identified multiple indicators that this video has been significantly altered." She stood, approached the large screen, and used a laser pointer to highlight key details. First, as the defense has already noted, the shadow of the individual identified as Mr. Moretti does not align with the light source in the parking garage. The overhead lighting originates from the upper left, yet the shadow of this figure falls to the left instead of the right. This is a fundamental error that occurs when compositing footage from different video sources. She turned to the next page of her report. Second, metadata analysis reveals that this video file was created on September 10th of this year, not on August 12th of last year as claimed by the prosecution. The file was edited at least 17 times using Adobe After Effects, a professional software designed for film editing and visual effects. The courtroom stirred. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. Sweat beaded visibly on Blake's bald head beneath the lights. And finally, Dr. Chen concluded, "Pixel-level analysis shows that the image of the individual alleged to be Mr. Moretti has a different resolution from the rest of the video. This can only occur when an image is extracted from another source and inserted. My professional conclusion is that this video is a fabrication and cannot be considered reliable evidence." Judge Hayes struck her gavel to quiet the room, then fixed Blake with a gaze sharp enough to freeze a desert. "The prosecution's video evidence is hereby excluded from the record," she declared coldly. "The jury will not consider this video in its deliberations." Blake went pale, literally pale. The color drained from his face as if a valve had been opened, leaving behind a sickly white mask. But Ava did not stop there. She rose, and in her eyes burned a fire Lucian had never seen before. "Your Honor," Ava said, her voice steady and commanding, "the defense requests permission to submit additional evidence." "Granted," Judge Hayes nodded. Ava stepped into the center of the courtroom, documents in hand. "The prosecution has alleged that my client laundered $800 million through his casino operations. What they failed to disclose to the court is that every dollar of that sum originates from legitimate and fully traceable sources." She handed the documents to the court clerk for distribution. "These are the complete audited financial reports of Moretti Holdings over the past 3 years, reviewed by a Big Four accounting firm. Every dollar stems from lawful business activity, including hotel revenue, casino profits, and real estate investments. There are no unexplained funds." Blake sprang to his feet, his voice shaking with anger. "Objection. These documents were not included in the original evidence list." Ava was ready. "Your Honor, these materials directly rebut the prosecution's claims and are admissible under the Federal Rules of Evidence, Rule 401. Judge Hayes looked at Blake without sympathy. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Miss Collins." Ava nodded and produced another set of documents. "And now, Your Honor, I present the most critical evidence." She raised the papers. "These are internal emails from the prosecutor's office, obtained through lawful discovery. These emails show that Mr. Blake and his team were aware that the video was fabricated 2 weeks before this trial began, yet chose to present it as their primary evidence." The courtroom exploded. Shouts, gasps, reporters hammering keyboards in a frenzy. Judge Hayes struck her gavel repeatedly, but could not immediately quell the chaos. Blake stood like a cornered animal, eyes bloodshot, veins bulging. Then he lost control. "Who do you think you are?" he roared, advancing toward Ava with fury etched across his face. "A child fresh out of law school, someone who tripped over her own shoes, daring to stand here and accuse me. You are nothing but a puppet for the Mafia, a soul sold to the devil for pocket change." Lucian leapt to his feet, gray eyes blazing with rage. But before he could move, Judge Hayes' gavel cracked through the air like thunder. "Silence," she shouted, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "Mr. Blake, this is an official warning. One more personal attack and I will hold you in contempt of court." She turned her furious gaze on the room. "Court is adjourned until 9 tomorrow morning. And Mr. Blake," She locked eyes with the visibly shaken prosecutor. "I strongly suggest you prepare a very convincing explanation for those emails." Blake stood frozen, his face twisted between terror and fury. Ava returned to the defense table, and as she sat beside Lucian, she felt his gaze upon her. When she looked up, she saw something she had never seen in his eyes before: admiration. The night before the verdict, the penthouse was wrapped in soft golden light and the hush of the city far below. Ava sat curled on the charcoal leather sofa, a glass of red wine resting in her hand. She had traded the frayed old blazer for a set of soft sleepwear someone had quietly placed in her closet, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. Lucian sat at the opposite end of the sofa, his tie loosened, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, a glass of whiskey swaying slowly in his hand. He looked different at home, less like the devil of the East Coast and more like an ordinary man, a man worn down by too many burdens carried alone. They had sat like this for hours, reviewing every detail of the case, preparing for every possible outcome the next day might bring. Now, with the clock edging toward 11 at night and nothing left to prepare, they simply sat in silence, gazing through the wall of glass at the millions of Manhattan lights shimmering outside. "How did you grow up?" Ava asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. She did not know why she asked. Maybe the wine had made her braver. Maybe she wanted to understand the man beside her. Lucian was silent for a long moment, long enough for Ava to think he would not answer. Then he took a sip of whiskey and began to speak, his voice low and distant, as if he were talking about someone else. "My mother left when I was 4, he said, his eyes fixed on nothing. She could not bear this life, could not bear my father, could not bear the shadow of the Moretti Empire pressing down on her. One day she was there, the next she was gone. No goodbye, no letter, not a single look back." Ava felt a sharp ache in her chest. She could not imagine what it must have felt like to be abandoned at 4 years old. "And your father?" she asked softly. Lucian smiled, but there was no joy in it. It was a bitter smile, scarred and old. "My father believed pain was the best teacher. He taught me everything with his fists. How to stand back up after being knocked down, how to hide pain, how to never let anyone see your weakness. He said the world was a battlefield, and only the strong survived." He looked down at the whiskey in his hand. "I hated him, but I am also grateful. Without those lessons, I would have died long ago." Ava did not know what to say. She only knew that the man sitting before her, the one the world feared, was once a wounded child who learned to build walls around his heart. "And you?" Lucian asked, turning to her. "You told me about your father this morning, but you did not tell me the good things." Ava smiled, and that smile carried both longing and warmth. "My father was the best man I ever knew. He was a security guard, did not earn much, and sometimes we lived on instant noodles for a week when money ran out. But every Sunday, no matter what, my father bought me ice cream." She looked out the window, her eyes bright with memory. "He would take me to the park, buy me a strawberry cone, and we would sit on a bench watching people pass by. He would tell me stories about the future, about how I would become a lawyer, how I would fight for justice, how I would do great things." Her voice caught. "He believed in me before I ever believed in myself." Lucian looked at her, and something shifted in his gray eyes. The coldness faded, replaced by something softer, warmer. "He would be proud of you," he said, his voice gentler than Ava had ever heard it. "You are standing in a courtroom, fighting for justice, doing great things, just as he said you would." Ava felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she smiled and took a sip of wine. They kept talking. About things that had nothing to do with the case, about favorite books, about the best films they had ever seen, about dreams they had abandoned and dreams they still chased. As they talked, they sat closer without noticing, the distance between them shrinking until their shoulders nearly touched. The wine made Ava drowsy, and her eyelids grew heavy. She meant to stand and go to her room, but the sofa was too soft, and the warmth of the man beside her too comforting. She only meant to close her eyes for a moment. When Lucian turned to look at her, Ava was asleep, her head tilted to one side, brown hair falling over her shoulder, her face peaceful like a child's. In sleep, she was no longer the fearless lawyer who had dismantled a witness and exposed a fake video. She was just a 27-year-old woman, tired and alone, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Lucian rose quietly, went to a cabinet, and retrieved a soft cashmere blanket. He returned and draped it over her, careful not to wake her. Then he stood there, watching her sleep for a long time, longer than he could measure. He did not understand what was happening to him. He had known hundreds of women, more beautiful, more seductive, wealthier. None of them had ever made him stand in the middle of the night like a fool just to watch them sleep. What had Ava Collins done to him? Lucian had no answer. He only knew that for the first time in 36 years, his frozen heart was beginning to thaw, and that frightened him more than any enemy he had ever faced. Lucian's phone vibrated at 2 a.m, shattering the silence of the penthouse. He was still awake, sitting in the darkness of his private office, the whiskey glass long empty, though he had not bothered to pour another. He glanced at the screen and saw Connor's name. He answered immediately. "Boss," Connor said, his voice urgent and charged with excitement. "We found him. Thomas Reed is being held in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, the Red Hook Industrial District. Kessler left only 4 gunmen on guard. My team is waiting for orders." Lucian stood, all fatigue evaporating as if it had never existed. "Assemble Alpha Team. I'm going myself." He ended the call and stepped out of the office. Passing through the living room, he paused for a second to look at Ava still sleeping on the sofa, the cashmere blanket draped over her, her face calm in sleep. He wouldn't wake her. She needed rest for tomorrow, and what he was about to do wasn't something she should witness. 20 minutes later, Lucian sat in a black armored SUV tearing through the empty New York streets at midnight. Connor sat beside him, checking his pistol one last time. In the back were 4 other men, all dressed in black, all armed, all ready to kill or be killed on Lucian Moretti's command. The Red Hook warehouse was an old red brick building, once used to store imported goods back in the 1970s and abandoned for decades. The windows were boarded shut, weeds overgrown around it, and not a single light burned outside. But Lucian knew there were people inside. He could see faint flashlight beams slipping through gaps in the steel door. 4 gunmen, Connor whispered through the headset. 2 at the front, 1 at the back, 1 patrolling inside. Thomas is in the basement. Lucian nodded. Silent. Fast. No survivors escaping. What followed unfolded with the cold precision of a perfectly programmed machine. Lucian's team moved like ghosts through the night. Not a sound. Not a misstep. The 2 gunmen at the front were taken down before they realized anyone had breached the perimeter. The one at the back was neutralized by Connor with a chokehold from behind. The patrolling guard inside was the only one who managed to draw his weapon. But Lucian was faster. 1 shot, clean to the shoulder, enough to drop him without killing him. Lucian needed him alive for questioning later. The basement was pitch black, lit only by a weak bare bulb swaying from the ceiling. Beneath that light, Thomas Reed sat on a wooden chair, hands bound behind his back, head slumped against his chest. Dried blood streaked his forehead and cheek, his once immaculate suit now torn and filthy. But when Lucian stepped closer, Thomas lifted his head, and his eyes were still bright, still sharp, still alive. "Thomas," Lucian said, his voice catching as he took in the condition of the man who had been like a godfather to him for 30 years. Connor cut the restraints while Lucian knelt beside Thomas. "I'm fine," Thomas said, his voice rough from dehydration but still strong. "Just a few surface wounds. They didn't dare go too far because they needed me alive." Lucian shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Thomas's shoulders. "We need to get you to a hospital." "No." Thomas shook his head, gripping Lucian's arm with surprising strength. "First I need to know. Her. Ava Collins. Did she come?" Lucian nodded. "She came. She's defending me, and she's winning." Thomas's eyes lit up, and a smile spread across his bruised face. "I knew I chose right. 30 years, Lucian. 30 years I've searched for someone like her. Clean, unbuyable, brilliant, reckless enough to be brave. She's the only one who can face Kessler without fear, because she has nothing left to lose except the truth." Lucian frowned. "You knew about Kessler?" Thomas nodded, his expression hardening. "I've known for 15 years, since the night he ordered the killing of Daniel Collins, Ava's father. I was there, Lucian. I saw everything, but I couldn't act. Not enough evidence, not enough power. So I waited. 15 years I gathered everything quietly. Recordings, documents, witnesses, every thread that could hang Kessler. I waited for the right moment, and that moment is now." He pulled a small USB drive from the inner pocket of his jacket, hidden well enough that the kidnappers never found it. "It's all here, enough to put Kessler away for life." Lucian took the drive, feeling the weight of 15 years of patience and sacrifice in his palm. "You risked everything for this. And for Ava," Thomas added, his voice softening. "She deserves to know the truth about her father. She deserves justice. Get me to court in the morning. I'll finish what she started." That morning, Ava woke on the sofa with the cashmere blanket still draped over her, and a strange feeling that something had shifted during the night. The penthouse was quiet. Lucian was nowhere to be seen, and she did not have time to wonder why, because the clock read 7 in the morning and court would begin at 9. She hurried to get ready, slipping into the clothes that had been washed and pressed by someone overnight, then headed to the courthouse alone. When she entered the courtroom, the seat beside her was empty. Lucian was not there. For the first time in the entire case, she had to face everything truly on her own. Judge Hayes struck the gavel to open the session, and Ava rose to deliver her closing argument. She had prepared for this moment over countless nights, rewriting every sentence again and again, practicing in front of the mirror until her voice no longer trembled. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ava began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "Throughout this trial, we have heard the prosecution level grave accusations against my client. They spoke of $800 million of dirty money. They spoke of money laundering and organized crime. They spoke of a terrifying mafia boss they called the Devil of the East Coast." She paused, letting her gaze move across the jury. But what did we truly witness? A witness who lied about where he was on the day of the alleged illegal transaction, a video fabricated using professional editing software, and a prosecutor who knew his evidence was false and chose to use it anyway to accuse an innocent man. She stepped closer to the jury, her eyes open and sincere. "You were summoned here to find the truth. And the truth is that there is no credible evidence proving my client laundered money. All we have seen are lies, forged evidence, and a scheme designed to destroy a successful businessman for reasons we are only beginning to understand. I ask you, in the name of justice, to find my client not guilty." Richard Blake stood to respond, but it was clear to everyone he had lost his strength. His voice wavered, his arguments collapsed under their own weight, and his eyes kept darting toward the door as if he were waiting for something or afraid of it. "Your Honor," Blake stammered, "errors in evidence do not mean the defendant is innocent. We still have financial reports showing irregular cash flow." But his words no longer carried power. After the fake video and the exposed lies, no one in the courtroom believed him. Judge Hayes struck the gavel and announced a recess for deliberation before the final verdict. The jury began to rise. Ava let out a breath, thinking it was over. Then the courtroom doors burst open. Every head turned, and stunned silence fell over the room. Thomas Reed walked in, supported by Lucian Moretti at his side. He looked weakened, his face still marked with bruises, white bandages wrapped around his forehead, but his eyes burned with determination. He wore a new suit, his back straight, and each step echoed through the hushed courtroom like a drumbeat. Ava stood frozen, her mouth open with no sound emerging. Thomas Reed was alive. Thomas Reed was here, and as he moved toward the witness stand, she knew everything was about to change. "Your Honor," Thomas said, his voice hoarse but steady. "My name is Thomas Reed, legal counsel for Moretti Holdings, and I request permission to present new evidence critical to this case." Judge Hayes stared at him in disbelief. "Mr. Reed, we were informed you were missing." "I was kidnapped, Your Honor," Thomas replied, "by the people behind this conspiracy, and now I am here to expose the truth." He produced a small USB drive and handed it to the court clerk. On this device are 15 years of collected evidence against Victor Kessler, the Chicago Mafia boss who orchestrated this entire case to destroy Lucian Moretti and seize his empire. Kessler bribed the witness Derek Chen, hired professionals to fabricate video evidence, and abducted me to prevent my appearance in court. The courtroom erupted. Reporters hammered their keyboards. Jurors exchanged shocked glances. Blake jumped to his feet, his face drained of color. "Objection, this is a farce." But Thomas continued, "And there is more, Your Honor." He turned his icy gaze toward Blake. "Among this evidence are emails and recordings proving that prosecutor Richard Blake accepted $1,200,000 from Victor Kessler to ensure Lucian Moretti would be convicted at any cost, including the use of falsified evidence." Blake collapsed into his chair, every trace of color gone. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Judge Hayes stood, her face flushed with fury. "Court security," she roared. "Arrest Richard Blake immediately for bribery and obstruction of justice. All materials concerning Victor Kessler are to be transferred to the FBI for federal investigation." 2 officers moved in to cuff Blake as he sat motionless like a statue. Ava stood there, tears streaming down her face without her noticing. She looked at Thomas, the man who had saved her life with a law scholarship 5 years earlier. She looked at Lucian, the man who had believed in her when no one else had, and she understood it was over. They had won. Judge Hayes struck the gavel one final time, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a bell signaling the end of a long and brutal war. Based on the new evidence presented and the complete failure of the prosecution to substantiate its allegations, she declared, her voice clear and absolute. "This court finds the defendant Lucian Moretti not guilty on all charges. The case is hereby dismissed." The courtroom exploded. Applause, cheers, reporters shouting questions, all crashing together into a chaotic symphony of victory. Ava stood frozen, her legs trembling, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She had done it. The girl with the broken heel and the overdue electricity bill had won an $800 million case against one of the most powerful mafia figures in the country. Then she felt a hand close around hers. Ava turned and saw Lucian standing beside her, his gray eyes fixed on her with a light she had never seen before. It was not the cold gaze of the devil of the East Coast. It was the look of a man seeing someone who truly mattered to him. "You did it," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. "Thank you." Ava could not find words. She only squeezed his hand tighter and smiled through the tears welling in her eyes. They stood like that for a long moment, surrounded by reporters and noise, as if time itself had paused just for them. After the courtroom emptied and silence settled in, Thomas Reed asked to see Ava privately. They sat in a small consultation room for attorneys, Thomas on one side of the table, Ava on the other, and Lucian leaning against the wall in the corner like a silent guard. Thomas placed a thick file on the table and slid it toward Ava. "There is something I need to tell you," Thomas began, his voice heavy and grave. "Something I have carried for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to say it. This is about your father, Ava, about Daniel Collins." Ava felt her heart skip a beat. She stared at the file as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike. Her hands shook as she opened it and began to read. Police reports, crime scene photos, witness statements, recordings, emails. Page after page, the cruel truth unfolded before her like a waking nightmare. Her father did not die in a robbery. Daniel Collins had been a security guard at a building owned by Victor Kessler in Queens. One night 15 years ago, he accidentally witnessed Kessler ordering the murder of a business rival in the building's parking garage. He intended to go to the police. He was a good man, a man who believed in justice, and he could not stay silent in the face of evil. Kessler found out and ordered him silenced. 2 weeks later, Daniel Collins was killed in a dark alley on his way home, his wallet still untouched in his pocket but 3 stab wounds in his chest. The police ruled it a robbery because Kessler had paid them to bury the truth. Ava did not realize she was crying until tears splashed onto the pages, blurring the merciless words. 15 years. 15 years she had lived with a lie. 15 years wondering why fate had been so cruel to her father. And now she knew. Her father did not die by chance. He died because he was a good man in a vicious world. She lost control. The sobs tore out of her chest, raw and broken. The grief she had buried for 15 years, finally unleashed. The room spun, and she would have collapsed if someone had not caught her. Lucian moved from the corner to her side before she even realized it. He sat beside her, and when she leaned instinctively for balance, she rested against his shoulder. He said nothing, simply let her cry, one hand resting gently against her back in silent reassurance. They stayed like that for a long time. Ava's sobs slowly fading until she was only whispering broken sounds into the fabric of his suit. Then, in the quiet after the storm, a question formed in her mind. A question she did not want answered but needed to ask. "When did you know?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "About my father. About Kessler. When did you know?" Lucian was silent for a moment. When he answered, his honesty hurt. Since the second night, Connor found the connection while investigating Kessler. Ava pushed away from him and sprang to her feet as if shocked. Her eyes were red from crying, now burning with fury. "You knew since the second night," she said, her voice shaking with restraint. "You knew the truth about my father and you did not tell me." "Ava," Lucian began, rising to follow her. "No," she shouted, backing away. "I told you about my father. I told you I always felt something was wrong. And you sat there, looking at me, knowing the truth and saying nothing." She shook her head, tears falling again, this time sharp with betrayal. "I need to leave." She turned and walked toward the door, each step cutting into Lucian like a blade. "Ava," he called, his voice breaking. She did not stop or turn back, but just before she disappeared through the doorway, he said, loud enough for her to hear, "I will find Kessler. I will get justice for your father. That is my promise." Ava paused for a single second, her back rigid. Then she walked away without a word, leaving Lucian alone in the empty room, his heart heavy and bound to a promise he knew he would keep at any cost. 6 months passed like a dream Ava Collins still didn't quite dare to believe was real. She stood in front of the brass plaque on her office door, the engraved letters gleaming under the soft hallway lights. Ava Collins, Chief Legal Officer, Moretti Holdings. Every morning when she walked past it, she still had to pinch herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. The girl from Queens with overdue electricity bills and a broken heel now had a corner office overlooking all of Manhattan, a team of attorneys reporting to her, and a salary she'd once never allowed herself to imagine. But the biggest changes had nothing to do with work. Her mother had undergone surgery 4 months earlier. The tumor had been completely removed, and the doctors said her recovery was progressing better than expected. For the first time in 2 years, Ava could call home without bracing herself for bad news. For the first time in 2 years, she could watch her mother smile without feeling her chest tighten with fear. Noah had received a full scholarship to Columbia University. The 17-year-old boy she'd once sworn to protect at all costs was now a freshman studying computer engineering, his future wide open in front of him. On move-in day, when Ava helped him carry his bags into the dorm, Noah hugged her tightly and told her it was all because of her. Ava cried the entire drive home, but they were tears of joy. Victor Kessler was awaiting trial in a federal detention center, facing a cascade of charges ranging from money laundering to first-degree murder. The evidence Thomas Reed had collected over 15 years had become the final nail in the Chicago Mafia boss's coffin. The FBI estimated the trial would last months, but the outcome was all but sealed. Kessler would die in prison. Justice for her father was finally coming. Yet amid all that light, there was one absence Ava couldn't ignore: Lucian Moretti. After the day she walked out of the courthouse, they didn't speak for 2 weeks. 2 long, punishing weeks. Ava spent angry, grieving, and trying to convince herself she didn't need him. She failed miserably. That night, rain poured down in sheets. Ava sat in her new Brooklyn apartment, a decent place she could finally afford, holding a book she couldn't focus on when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door and froze. Lucian Moretti stood there in the downpour, soaked from head to toe. His expensive suit clung to his body, dark hair plastered to his forehead, rain streaming down his face like tears. He didn't look like the devil of the East Coast. He looked like an ordinary man standing at the door of the woman he loved, his heart laid bare. "What are you doing here?" Ava asked, her voice trembling though she wasn't cold. Lucian met her gaze. His gray eyes weren't cold anymore, but filled with emotions he didn't know how to name. "I don't know how to apologize," he said hoarsely. "I grew up in a world where apologies were weakness, where showing emotion was suicide. I don't know how to say the right things, don't know how to be romantic, don't know how to love someone the right way." He paused, swallowing as if he were swallowing his pride whole. "But I know this. I don't want to lose you, Ava. These past 2 weeks without you have been the worst of my life. I can lose $800 million without blinking, but the thought of losing you makes it hard to breathe." Rain splashed onto Ava's face through the open doorway, but she didn't care. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had hidden the truth about her father, who had hurt her, but also the man who had protected her and Noah, who had covered her with a blanket when she fell asleep on the sofa, who had kept his promise and brought Kessler to justice. "You're an idiot," she said finally. "I know," Lucian replied, "and I'm going to have to work very hard to make it up to you. I'll do anything." Ava stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in, you're soaking wet." Lucian stepped inside, and when she closed the door behind him, he turned to her, disbelief written all over his face. "You forgive me?" "Not yet," Ava said honestly, "but I'm willing to give you a chance to earn it." And that was how they began. Not with a cinematic kiss in the rain, but with a dry towel, a cup of hot tea, and conversations that lasted until dawn. They learned how to trust again from the ground up, learned how to open their hearts, learned how to love, in their own way, slowly, carefully, and truthfully, in every moment. 1 year after that historic trial, Moretti Holdings hosted a lavish celebration at the Plaza Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in New York. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom, from business partners to senior executives, from Thomas Reed in a pristine new suit to Noah Collins sitting proudly beside his mother, who now looked healthier and more radiant than she had in years. Ava stood near the edge of the room, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching the crowd with a quiet, satisfied smile. She wore a long black evening gown that brushed the floor, elegant and striking, nothing like the frayed blazer-wearing girl who'd stumbled into a courtroom a year earlier. She'd changed in countless ways, yet inside she was still Ava Collins from Queens, the woman who believed in justice and never quit. Lucian stood on the stage under the warm lights, his sharp features illuminated, and Ava couldn't take her eyes off him. 6 months of dating had shown her sides of him no one else ever saw. To the world, he was still cold, still the devil of the East Coast everyone feared. But to her, He was the man who cooked noodles at 2 in the morning when she worked late, who drove 2 hours just to buy strawberry ice cream from her father's favorite shop, who held her all night when nightmares from the past came back to haunt her. "Good evening, everyone," Lucian began, his voice carrying through the ballroom. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Moretti Holdings surviving the $800 million lawsuit." Polite applause rippled through the room. Ava smiled, assuming this would be a standard CEO speech. She had no idea what was coming. "But tonight," Lucian continued, his tone softening, "I don't want to talk about the company or money. I want to tell you about a day, exactly 1 year ago, when my life changed forever." Ava's heart started racing. She set her champagne down, her hands suddenly trembling for reasons she couldn't explain. 1 year ago, I was sitting in a courtroom, facing the loss of everything. My lawyer was gone. No one was coming to save me, and $800 million was about to disappear. Lucian smiled, a rare smile meant only for Ava, and then the doors burst open, and a tornado walked in. Light laughter spread through the room. "A young woman," Lucian went on, "with messy hair, a worn-out blazer, and one high heel with a broken heel. She tripped right in the middle of the aisle. Her briefcase flew open, papers everywhere. An overdue electricity bill landed at the prosecutor's feet. The laughter grew louder. Noah whistled from his table. Ava's mother covered her mouth, tears shining in her eyes, and the entire courtroom laughed at her," Lucian said, his voice lowering. "The prosecutor called her a child playing dress-up. No one believed she could do anything at all." Ava stood frozen, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and happiness all at once. "But I looked into her eyes," Lucian continued, "and I saw what no one else did." He paused, his gaze finding Ava across the room and locking onto hers. "I saw the determination of someone with no way back. I saw the strength of someone who'd learned to fight alone. I saw the beauty of a soul that refused to be broken by adversity." Lucian stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward Ava. The crowd instinctively parted, creating a silent path for him. Each step echoed in the suddenly quiet ballroom. Ava couldn't move. Her heart felt like it was about to burst. "She saved my company," Lucian said when he reached her, his voice carried by the microphone on his lapel. "She saved Thomas Reed. She reclaimed justice for her father. And in the process, she saved my soul." He slipped his hand into his jacket and pulled out a small red velvet box. Then, in front of hundreds of people, Lucian Moretti, the devil of the East Coast, the most powerful mafia boss on the eastern seaboard, dropped to one knee. A collective gasp swept through the room. Noah jumped to his feet, eyes wide. Ava's mother began to cry openly. Thomas Reed nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Ava Collins," Lucian said, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring sparkling under the lights. "You stumbled into my life with an overdue electricity bill and a broken heel. You taught me that strength isn't never falling but always standing back up. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Ava's face, but she was smiling brighter than she ever had in her life. "I still owe $100,000 in law school debt," she said through a sob. "Are you sure you want to marry someone with that much debt?" Lucian smiled, a smile that melted every heart in the room. "I'll pay off your debt," he said, "and you'll owe me for the rest of your life." Ava laughed through her tears, nodding again and again, because she couldn't find her voice. "Yes," she finally whispered. "I do." The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers as Lucian rose, slid the ring onto Ava's finger, and kissed her in front of hundreds of witnesses, sealing a love born from chaos, courage, and an unbreakable truth. Lucian gently slipped the diamond ring onto Ava's ring finger, his movements careful and reverent, as if he were holding the most precious treasure of his life. Then he lifted her face, his gray eyes searching hers, and kissed her amid the thunderous applause of the ballroom. That kiss carried the salt of joyful tears, the warmth of a love that had survived countless storms, and the promise of a future they would build together. From the family table, Noah's excited voice shattered the romantic moment. "So my brother-in-law is officially a billionaire now." The entire room burst into laughter. Ava laughed through her tears and turned toward her brother with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and affection. Her mother was crying and laughing at the same time. Thomas Reed was nodding in quiet satisfaction, and Lucian, the man the world called the devil, was looking at her as if she were his entire universe. After the party, when the guests had gone and the lights had softened, Ava and Lucian stood by the familiar penthouse window, gazing out at the glittering lights of New York below. She rested her head on his shoulder, the diamond ring catching the light on her finger, and she thought about the journey that had brought her here. 1 year earlier, she had been invisible, a junior associate no one noticed, with overdue electricity bills, a gravely ill mother, a younger brother to protect, and debts piling up. She had stumbled in a courtroom, been laughed at, dismissed, and called a child playing pretend. But she hadn't quit. She'd stood up every time she fell. She'd fought when no one believed she could win. She'd proven that true strength doesn't come from money or power, but from a heart that refuses to surrender. And now she stood here beside the man she loved, with a healthy and happy family, justice finally served for her father, and a bright future waiting ahead. She was no longer invisible. She was the woman who had tamed the devil. "What are you thinking about?" Lucian asked softly. Ava smiled and looked up at him. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst days of our lives turn out to be the beginning of the most beautiful things." Lucian kissed her forehead in quiet agreement. The story of Ava and Lucian reminds us that no matter how many times life knocks us down, what matters is that we always rise and keep moving forward. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that justice may arrive late but it does arrive, and that each of us carries the power to change our own destiny. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next emotional stories. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever lived through moments that felt hopeless but later became turning points in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear the stories from your hearts. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.